Here it is, part 6, finishing this top fuel front half on this single-seater for Larry Dixon. Hey, I want to show you guys this. This is one of my secrets that I run. This is a piece of welding wire just laying across this frame rail. You can see it's kind of dancing around. Now, the reason why it's doing it is because of this. This is an old school back massager. You can adjust the RPM on it. You can make the vibration be whatever you want, but its goal is to help relieve thermal stress while I'm welding this thing up. And let me tell you what, it works. That's why I don't have to bolt this chassis down when I weld it. That's why it doesn't go cuckoo and pull a wire, pull one tube up or down or sideways. I've welded them both ways. Let me tell you what, this saves it. So I'll make my way around this thing and I'll just kind of watch it as I'm welding it and just seeing how it reacts, to different areas when I weld it. I don't want it to try and lift up out of the jig at all. But I want to recommend one thing. When you're welding something up and you've got a lot of hose and that kind of thing, you need to know how much gas you have at the gun. That's what this does. Now, you can have everything flowing like it is, at the bottle, but what is it at the tip? That's what helps save welds, keeping them cool, keeping them shielded, is making sure you have the right amount of argon at the tip where you're welding. So back to work on this thing. I've sped it up here a little bit, but you can kind of see how I chase this thing around. And here you go. Now keep in mind, this is all chromoly tubing, and it's all been sanded before it's welded. And the reason why we do that is to get the crust off the top so it's not contaminating the welds. We're also vibrating it. So we're mixing the rod and the material together and helping relieve all that thermal stress that develops when you're welding this stuff. Anybody knows when you weld this stuff, man, it can yank it one way or another. Now, on the one section where I have the stops and I have it floating on top, I just kind of use some welding wire in between just to set it as I'm welding it. And there's my gap that I have that allows that thing to move back and forth a little bit to help take the hot spots off this chassis. Now, on the other end, I don't weld it all the way around, but I rosette it into place. And that also is done because there's no cross member because the fuel tank sets right there. And the two last things that I do after the chassis is welded up is I marry it to the cage area and then I marry it to the front end. I double check to make sure everything's straight the way I want it, and then I'll go ahead and connect these things together. Another thing I'll do is cut that hole open right there so the clutch line can come out of that frame rail and go to the management system that actually sits right there on that bay. You can see here, I'll just go in there and I'll drill it, and then I'll just take a die grinder and just match it up to the hole that's already there. So now off to the front end here, we'll get it rosetted, and then we'll go ahead and finish the butt weld on it. And once we get done with those, I'm going to start on what we call the stringers. Now, these are the cross members that's going to go in between the three main bays that are off the foot box. And what it's going to do is it's going to help prevent this car from going into yaw. So the way that I'm going to mount these are going to be on a single shear on a Clevis style X brace. But first things first. When I've got these things in, they looked hideous. It looks like something that ought to be on a tractor or a lawnmower, something like that. So we can't have that. So I built a quick little fixture here and fired up the old end mill and wrote a program real quick so I can lighten all these things. Now, on this cut for the camera, I didn't have the coolant on, and you see I about jacked up my bit doing that, but anyway, you get the point. I'm just trying to show you guys the operation of this, so without the coolant on it, so you can see what the hell's going on. You say, oh, Wendland, why didn't you just leave it, Well, hell, there's 12 of these things on here, and like I said, it looks like a damn tractor part, so that's not cool on a race car, so you got to fix that stuff. And I saved myself about $10 a Clevis by doing this. I've already got the end mill, I already got the bit, so there's no cost in it that way. But here's your kind of before and after of what it looks like. Big, giant, round. Now, cool and slimmed down. And there's one more operation I do in the lathe on this too. But anyway, you get the point. So I had to do 36 of these things. So that ate up about an hour and a half of my time. But, the end result was cool. It did what I wanted to do. And then I also had to lighten some tabs up while I had this thing up and running. So there's another hour of my life that it's gone. Not working on the car, but actually just making parts. So then I started looking at it and go, I could actually lighten these up a little bit more on the sides. So modify the fixture, make it bolt in, write a quick another program, and then do 36 more operations on lightening these things up. All in all, it was another hour, but they came out pretty nice, so it was worth it. Now back to mounting these things in the car. So this here is a fixture that you can actually buy. I believe it's Trick Tools that has a lot of these things. Anyway, it's basically a third hand. When you're mounting tabs and things like that, and you want a specific location, and you're sitting there trying to hold it, and then you're trying to fuse it, in place, so then you can come back and weld it, and then all of a sudden you're missing half the tab because you're sitting there trying to fuse it to the deal. So just invest in some simple little tools that will give you a third hand so you can do a more professional job and actually get something in the exact location that you want. I bought these things, I don't know, like 3 years ago, and it kind of changed my life a little bit. As I was able to, like I said, not burn up so many tabs and things like that when you're sitting there trying to fuse these things on. And the same company makes some little fixture pieces that will actually like hold a 90-degree part, off of another part and that kind of thing. And they're all adjustable, and hell, they work real well. So I'll get all these tabs put on the uprights. So what basically is going to happen is there's going to be an X in between each one of these bays. And that X is going to keep that box square as it's going down the track. So when you make a right-hand turn, you don't want the front end going left, but the wheels are turning right. So this is going to keep this noodle with more integrity staying straight as it's going down the track. Now these braces are kind of a bitch to make. You've got two things happening here. You got one solid rod that's passing through a sleeve, and then you have two other rods that are butting up into the sleeve. So you got to be careful when you're welding it. This is 049 material, so it's pretty damn thin, that you're not getting inside that sleeve and then stopping that piece, from moving. It needs to be free of each other, but yet work together. If they were welded all solid together, they'd really try to break apart from each other as it's going down the track. So about 3 hours later, voila, here they are, all three of them. And while I was doing this, I went ahead and cut most of the material for the next two cars. That way, so I'm ahead. Pretty much the miter cuts on them are all about the same. So now it's on to mounting the body. The body mounts with Zeus fasteners. And, this chassis has quite a bit of arch to it. So you don't want to sit there and put the bottom edge of the body with the frame rail. So what I do is I string it, and then I mark where my Zeusers are going to be, and that way, so the body is nice and straight on frame rails that have an arch. So it's not as predominant as it would look. It'd look like it was a U shape, basically, if it was sitting on the ground, if you just went off the bottom frame rail. So anyway, so here's the finished project. It all came out really nice. And now, on to the fuel tank. The fuel tank is basically suspended on two metal 3/4 inch hollow rods. So there's some tabs that are going to come up off the chassis. The rod goes through those tabs. The tank itself has rubber bushings on each side of it that rod goes through. So that thing is setting in there, kind of suspended on these rubber bushings and these rods. Now, what I've found is when these tanks are welded up, like this one here was actually pretty bad. It looked like, not like Ray Charles welded it or anything like that, but like a lot of it was not square. And so you're always sitting here trying to get the best of both worlds. Like on one side it had, 3/8 of a gap, and on the other side it had a 1/16, but it has to have gap. You don't want this thing beating on the side of these frame rails, because what it'll do, it'll just basically wear a hole in it and you'll have a fuel leak. So the goal is to have this thing floating in the frame rails, not touching anything, and that's its safest gig. Now, you think about it. There's 12 and a half, 13 gallons of nitro in here. So this stuff weighs like 7 pounds per gallon. So you've got 100 pounds hanging on these two rods when you hit the gas on this. So not necessarily when you hit the gas, because it does burn up quite a bit in the burnout and all that kind of stuff. So, but anyway, there's quite a bit of weight in this thing, especially when you're talking about 5 G's taking off and 6 G's, when the chutes are out. That tank wants to go anywhere but stay right there in those frame rails. So I called old Dixon up and said, hey man, help me get this old girl off the jig. Let's get her to its home so you can put this thing back together. We're going to run Martin, Michigan, August, I believe, 6th and 7th. You guys need to come out and check that out. But here she rolls out of the shop. That's nice that Dixon's across the parking lot from me, so that works out pretty good. But look at Dixon. He thinks it's a skateboard or something, I guess. But anyway, I had a lot of fun sharing my knowledge with you guys on how to build a chassis. Thanks for watching. Sure appreciate it.